All right, welcome everyone to the July 2023 Boise ITSM Talks meeting. It's hard to believe we're already here in the middle of the summer and nearing the end of July. And I don't know about other folks, but I know if my kids already are starting school here in about 3 weeks, and it just feels like summer's been flying by. But happy to still be able to have these meetings in the summer, and I'm very pleased that we're having a meeting here at the end of July, and very happy to welcome Jeffrey Tefertiller to our Boise ITSM Talks meeting as our guest presenter. I'm going to go ahead and share my little intro presentation and walk us through just a little bit of our agenda and our announcements here. So let me go ahead and share. All right, is everyone seeing my screen?
Yes.
Looks great.
All right. Terrific, thank you. All right, so again, appreciate everyone being here. We'll go ahead and get started. So first of all, thank you for taking time out of your day to attend the meeting. For those of you that are listening to the recording, we normally have some more folks here, and we have some technical issues potentially with Meetup. So I'm going to be working with Ryan and see if we can't troubleshoot that. It sounds like there's some looping going on with people being able to log in and get to the Zoom. I did put in the comments link, the direct link to the Zoom for today's meeting, but we'll see if we can't figure out a way to make sure that that's directly visible and we're not having any issues. Give Jeffrey a chance to introduce himself here in just a minute, but really appreciate him being here today. And normally we have some first timers. I saw some first timers sign up for this meeting and in joining the meetup. So hopefully if they see this, they can still make it in. And we normally try and allow some time for introductions for those folks who have been here for the first time. The introduction for this meeting is the same as always. We're here with our vision statement to deliver actionable information through our presentations and to encourage attendee participation. And I think our topic today is definitely something that lends itself to a lot of opportunities for follow-up and participation. The CMDB is always, for me, one of those concepts and one of those architectures that people all know that they need, but we don't always know why we need it. And it's hard to get our arms around it. And I think it'll be great to see Jeffrey's presentation and to lead to some further dialogue, both within this group today, as well as, like I said, for some potential follow-ups. And of course, what's our why? Big fans of Simon Sinek here, and starting with why. Our why is to inspire you to become a better IT leader and to continue to fill what I consider to still be a void of IT service management in our organizations and in our communities. And we see a lot of other frameworks that have been brought into the fold of the larger ITSM umbrella. And the more we can do to find that opportunity to collaborate within our organizations and our communities, I think the better. All right, today's presentation, 4 ways to improve every CMDB. Again, Jeffrey, appreciate you being here. If you'd like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your company, Service Management Leadership, and then I'll hand over presenting rights to you and give you the opportunity to lead us through your presentation today.
Sure. And your previous slide about there being a void really sticks with me, because nowadays you can tell I'm from the South, right? Nowadays most of what we see is driven by the tool vendors, where it's driven by different constituents, but very little that really help people do their jobs better. Leaders make better decisions, practitioners to do their jobs better. I came to that realization in 2016, 2017, as I was trying to grow. I was at the time an ITIL V3 expert, but I was still trying to grow. You know, you can go through all of that and you'd still like, I need to learn more. And so I didn't find that much out there. So I started a YouTube channel, and it's got 1,600 videos. And just to try, it's like, if I couldn't find it, other people couldn't find information. So how do I help the broader community? And since then, I've written some books, started a podcast, all that fun stuff, just to help people. Right now, I'm in the consulting side with Service Management Leadership is my company. My last corporate role was I left, and I always say this with a smile because it's kind of humorous. I left being a director at KPMG US, where I was in charge of 75% of their service management for their internal support. And so I had everything but service desk, incident, and problem. So, most of change, config, all that stuff. And so I left there in January of 2020, right before the pandemic, to start my own, go off on this grand adventure. And it's been an adventurous 3 years. And so we at Service Management Leadership just focus, don't met tool agnostic, don't really worry about the tools, but focus on the service management, asset management, business continuity world. So hopefully that gives you a little background of who I am and what I am. I'm really active on LinkedIn, and most of that's just sharing knowledge. Like, how do I help people get better at what they do? One of the funniest things that happened, I met Jeff in person at last year's Pink conference, and there was a gentleman there named Alex. Don't say this broadly on LinkedIn. Alex had never been in service management before, but watched my little YouTube videos and applied for a manager role and talked his way into that role, which always makes me pretty like a proud parent, just to be able to help people on their journey. And so that's what I try to do. I'm at this stage in the career where I try to be the rising tide to lift other boats. And so there's 4 ways to improve every CMDB. If you ever hear me talk, it's usually at a pretty tactical level. We get enough strategy. There's plenty of people that do that very well. I just don't see very much tactical advice being given, and so I try to live at that level. Is that good enough intro there for you, Jeff?
That's awesome and very philosophically aligned with that. I love the rising tide analogy. Absolutely. So terrific. I'll go ahead and stop sharing and give you control to take us through your presentation.
And where that comes from, Jeff, is early in my career, I wanted to solve every problem. I wanted to climb every mountain. And then as closer we get to the end of our career, the more we're like, how can I help other people on their journey so they can climb those mountains, so they can do great things? And so that's where I'm at today. All right. So I only have 20 or so slides, and I welcome feedback, and we'll have questions at the end. If anybody has questions between, in the middle, you won't offend me by speaking up. So feel free. So let's get this party started. Can you see my slides okay, Jeff?
Looks good.
All right. I went with these colors, and all self-employed people get to choose design and all that. I like these colors because they're warm. I know some people like harsh colors, but I chose these because they're warm. All right, so let's get started. So there's a fact that a great CMDB contributes to operational excellence. And I call this fact, and you all tell me if you disagree, given the next few slides. So research from Forrester, the State of IT Service Management 2022. I had Charles Betts on my podcast. He's a VP analyst for Forrester, and we talked about all of this. And it's really pretty interesting. So 91% of respondents said that CMDB was essential for their operations management. Essential is a big word there, right? It's not like, oh, it's kind of helpful. It's essential. And so continuing on that, here's a quote: CMDB for all of its, oh, sorry. All right, CMDB for all of its terrible reputation and years of failure, all of a sudden is showing up as this really important factor, says Mr. Betts. That was a huge surprise. And he said that they saw the CMDB was correlated with better business outcomes. And what's interesting to me, so I've given this presentation before, every time do you all ever read something and the more you read it, something new pops out? It's interesting to me that this was a surprise to the Forrester people. Those of us in the ITSM world, we're like, well, yeah, but it's interesting that it popped up to them that the CMDB has a horrible reputation, which it does, years of failure, which it does, but they were surprised that it's now correlated with business outcomes. That is that's important, I think. So CMDB improvement comes in 4 varieties: an outside-in approach, so ensuring that stakeholders for the CMDB are what they need out of the CMDB, those desired outcomes, they are realized. For too many times in my career, we've seen a CMDB that was IT centric. And I'll make this comment later on, but the CMDB serves no other purpose than to help the decision making of their stakeholders. There's no reason to keep that data otherwise. Appropriate scope, ensuring the scope is appropriate for the stakeholders' desired outcome. Those desired outcomes are really interesting to me. When I took over at KPMG, it was on their 6th try for getting the CMDB right. Number 5 was flipping on the switch so Discovery found everything. And you're talking about a huge enterprise, right? KPMG US, big enterprise. And so having that much scope meant that there's no way to tell heads or tails of what we had. And so we had to start saying, okay, what's important to our stakeholders? Let's start with the basics, the Pareto principle, if you will. What's that 80% that would get us a great start? And we went from 58, 59% to 83 in 6 months, which was really pretty good. So governance, ensuring the appropriate level of governance is present to represent an operating model. Those of us see governance in the ITSM world a little differently than most, because I think we all appreciate the value that governance brings, and not everybody does. And so data quality, mentioned this, but ensuring data quality is optimal and helps stakeholders achieve their desired outcomes. So we care about the stakeholders, what are their needs, so we can have that approach, scope, appropriate governance, and data quality. So more research from Forrester and Mr. Betts. People want the CMDB for a wide variety of data management problems. What happens is a CIO, CTO, they'll come in and say, what's the status of technical debt? What's the status of software? And he says, the answers to all those are found in the CMDB. I had a recent client that had that same question about the technical debt, especially when we talk about like tools rationalization, application rationalization, all that sort of thing. And so we must consider the needs of all stakeholders when designing, implementing, or improving the CMDB, so we don't get into those technical debt type of situations. So we're diving a little deeper on each of those 4, an outside-in approach. So we need to include corporate strategy, our business stakeholders, like sales, marketing, accounting, technology stakeholders. One of the biggest, if I can use an ITIL V3 reference, CSS, is having buy-in from our CI owners and our CI class owners. They have to own their data. So we may have security and risk stakeholders, business continuity or DR stakeholders. Most CMDBs nowadays have an attribute for DR level, just so that they can know what's important for a disaster during a disaster. Also financial stakeholders. So an outside-in approach. Here are some common things from these stakeholder groups. Corporate strategy cares about our scope. We should have scope in our CMDB that aligns somewhat with our corporate strategy. If our corporate strategy, it means that we have a presence on 4 continents, so should our CMDB. We should make sure that there's alignment. It should help in decision making and be transparent. I talk a lot about transparency in the CMDB. I don't know if you all have experienced places where it's very painful to turn around those perceptions if there's not transparency. We also have the business units. They care about service costing. They also care about the support efficiency. So if we've mapped our services, they care about what's our uptime for those services. They care what's that service costing me, things of that nature. Security cares about scope. They want everything in the CMDB as much as possible. Security cares about data quality, and also they care about how we audit. Financial, service costing, cost of outages. Not many organizations are mature enough to worry and start calculating the cost of outages. The most recent numbers for a medium-sized organization is $8,000 to $10,000 a minute, and that's for medium size. You think about some of the Microsoft outages, seems like they have one every week for Teams or Outlook, costs them way more than that. Or Facebook had an outage. I also remember about a decade ago when I think it was Delta Airlines had that outage and it was because of a fail change and stranded people everywhere, and they went hours without being able to take reservations or rebook people, and that was very costly. And lastly, we care about, from a technology point of view, tech debt, BCDR, as well as the ITSM practices. Those of us that have been around the service management world a long time really hold the CMDB dear in terms of the scope of the CMDB is what determines the scope of your incident management. You can't have an incident on something that's not in the CMDB. You can't have a change for something that's not in the CMDB. So we also must consider those. So let's talk about scope. Scope comes in the form of CI classes, so network or database or whatever it may be, and then attributes for each of the CIs. Those attributes are usually a fixed list under each CI class. So each CI class will have a unique set of attributes. However, there are 4 things to remember about scope. It must enable stakeholder value, so only take on what is important, because each piece of scope has a cost attached. And so we live in a world of finite resources. So if we have twice as many attributes, keeping track, trying to make sure data quality is high, than we need, it costs us extra time, extra personnel to address that scope. What not to include is just as important as what to include. I think, at least in my life, that applies to almost every part of my life. What I won't do is just as important as what I will. And lastly, do not take on more scope than the team can execute. You can add scope as you go along through the established governance. So I know some organizations, like thinking of one large financial institution, that leadership wants far more scope than they've resourced. And so then they complain about data quality. It's like the old project management riddle, if you will. You can pick 2 out of 3, good, cheap, and fast. This, you can't. If you want scope and you want governance, you have to have resources to execute. So let's talk about governance. I have a 17-year-old son, and I asked him, what does this picture make you think of? And he said, old people. And I was thinking, I'm not that far from looking like them. So, it's being 17 again and thinking everybody over the age of 22 is old. So if you want to go fast or far very safely, you want governance. I always use this picture because we don't think of a roller coaster having governance. But the faster it goes, the more we worry about, are we using the right nuts and bolts for this? Are we using everything that we're supposed to? Because we can't have people, as this picture is, a couple 100 feet in the air, have issues. And I've been in my career around people that were contractors for like the Air Force bases. And you talk about governance, there's standards for every part, there's how we test them, things of that nature. And that's why I say if we want to go very fast, we have to have governance, especially. So we have to have this governance whether we realize it or not. So governance provides this operating model that ensures stakeholders realize their desired outcomes. A mutual friend of Jeff and I's, David Cannon, talks a lot about how governance is an operating model. Governance allows things to move smoothly. So this operating model includes policies and processes, roles and responsibilities, an approval mechanism for scope growth, standardized reporting, things of that nature. See, that doesn't look like what most people think of as bureaucratic governance. It's basically, how are we operating our CMDB? How are we enabling stakeholders to get what they want and need? Even the roles and responsibility of simple RACI is missing from many, if not most, organizations. In the approval mechanism for scope growth, a lot of organizations use a configuration control board, which looks a little bit like a CAB, but it has a broad stakeholder representation. And the reason that's needed is because, for example, incident management may want something and an attribute to look like being blue, but if that happens, problem management, it hurts them and they want it in green. We have to have some formal way to make these decisions without everything being one person or one group or escalated to a leader. And this is even more so the case when we talk about enterprise service management, when our CIs are spread across an enterprise. We have a lot of stakeholders, broad. So data quality. If the goal is outstanding data decision making, then these decisions require outstanding data. If we remember back to the ITIL V3 knowledge management, you all remember the data, information, the knowledge, and then wisdom. This data quality and decision making lives out on that wisdom edge. And so it's, how do we transform this data into something that we can make great decisions upon? So sadly, most leaders do not have confidence in their CMDB data. And I use this analogy often, is if those of us old enough to have a checkbook, but the people under 30 don't understand what a checkbook is. But if I told you that your checkbook was 88% accurate, you'd say, hey, that's great. And then you'd think, what are the 12%? What does that represent? And so, and then if you knew that it was 88%, it would change how you make decisions, because you wouldn't have full confidence that that data was correct to be able to go buy a car, go buy something large. And so what we're trying to do in a CMDB world is, how do we help these stakeholders be invested from an outside-in approach, and then enable them to have confidence in that data? Because without their confidence in that data, it's a lost cause. So it's talking about data quality again. I said earlier, I'm active on LinkedIn. I ran this poll. How is your CMDB data quality? I don't know if this surprises you all, but this is about what I see. And sometimes the quality is better than what people perceive it to be. Sometimes they have to reduce scope just to be able, because you have all those wild things that they don't know what they are, bringing down their accuracy numbers. And so these numbers are pretty shocking. And I use that checkbook example that 87% are under 80% accurate. And so that's a lot of people that do not have confidence in their CMDB data quality. So how do we measure that data quality? It's one thing for me to say, hey, Jeffrey, we need data quality. How do you measure it? So there are three ways. Completeness means all your CIs are in your CMDB. And I put this in there because I don't know if you all have seen the trend, and it's been promoted by a certain tool maker to call service management enterprise service management. I don't know if you all have seen that. It's been big buzzword. But then we called enterprise service management, and then we only put IT CIs in it. And so if it's going to be truly an enterprise service management CMDB, it needs to have enterprise stakeholders represented, and it needs to have enterprise CIs. Does that make sense? All right, accuracy. So we want everything in the CMDB, and then we want the CIs and their relationships to be accurate. So we know in an incident happens that this server is connected to this database, which is connected to this application. That application has other applications that are dependent on it, and we understand the scope of that incident. And lastly, we care about the attributes information being accurate. The attributes may not seem like very much, but if you think of like support tiers, We've all seen places that have gold, silver, bronze tiers of support. If those are wrong, then we care. I tell this story that maybe you all will get a chuckle. When I was at KPMG, we were bad at decommissioning servers, bad. And so one such time, the group said that they were decommissioning the server. They took it, they put through a change to say they decommissioned server. They put the IP address in info blocks so that the build group could pick that up and build another server. However, they did not really take that server out of commission, even though in the CMDB it said that it's retired. So when that new server popped on, you can imagine those two IP addresses were doing battle for those two servers were doing battle over that one IP address. And I tell that story because even the KPMGs of the world that give advice to everyone still had those kind of problems. And so a lot of other organizations just being able to follow the process. And if we say that we're retiring a server, we really need to pull it out of commission. So our measuring of our CMDB quality should include make sure everything's in there in the CMDB, make sure that the CIs are accurate, and make sure that attribute information is accurate. So I like this is a fun slide. Imagine the possibilities of a great CMDB, optimal decision-making, end-to-end understanding, especially through services, improved operational efficiency spoken to by the Forrester report, transparency of technology cost, health, performance, and compliance. The CMDB is the only, I won't say only, one of the main parts of service management that it has, to use a Southern term, it has no dog in the fight. It has nothing to gain by having good data that's not transparent. And so, because all it's doing is reporting on other things. And so transparency of those costs, that's a big deal. Health, performance, and compliance. Those are all huge. That compliance could be everything from software to warranty, security and risk, all the way down to process compliance. The process compliance, only through the CMDB and regular discovery will you know that if unauthorized changes are going on, unless they have a failed change, of course. But it's through that compliance mechanism that the CMDB enables other practices, processes to do great work. Gives us increased uptime, whether it's through better change management, or even reduced MTTR for incidents. Trusted for corporate strategy. I like this slide as well. But so a great CMDB requires a delicate mix of technology and people. And the reason, if you all notice, I haven't talked to any really about the technology used, because so many people talk about a very technology-centric CMDB, and there's so much, as we've discussed, that it has nothing to do with which tool set you use, how you're using it, what integrations, all that sort of thing. So it's a mix of people and technology. And you can see a few of the topics there in the tree. So technology, we have the discovery, we have service mapping, we have integrations. People, we have the relationships, we have reporting, we have audit and verification. And so it takes both to do really well. And here's the punchline. We talked about the title being 4 steps to improving every CMDB. Define the scope for success and focus your efforts on enabling stakeholder value. Regularly audit your data and make sure that you're ready to act on findings. I don't know if you all have ever experienced this. Whenever there's an audit and somebody says, we need help, and then it kind of goes away. And then the next time it comes up and they're like, yes, we know. And as long as we're not willing to act, there's really no reason to audit. Add integrations to improve data quality. One thing I can tell you, I said I'm tool agnostic. is that none of the CMDBs I've been around, I mean, of the tool sets, do a great job at discovery. They rely on integrations to Active Directory, SCCM. They rely on other integrations to have great data quality. And then technical teams must own their data. We spoke about that. And this one right here is probably the biggest pain point in most organizations. I want to be fair to these technical teams. Let's take the database group. They have plenty of incidents that they have to respond to. They have plenty of requests. Hey, can you spin up a database for me? Can you do this or that? They have plenty of changes that they have to worry about. That's just for us ITSM folk, not to mention the actual work they do. So having them own their data, which is imperative, you can see why it's not a priority and why we as ITSM leaders must be willing to have those conversations with the IT technical leaders. And as we go to enterprise service management, have it with the enterprise leaders. So why should we invest in the CMDB? Great corporate decisions, corporate competitive advantage. We talked about that with Charles Betts's quotes, that it is tied, CMDB, to operational excellence. And in today's world, operational excellence is a competitive advantage. Improved IT ops, less than the corporate risk, gives us transparency, gives us improved ITSM processes, efficiency of our resources, helps us gain trust from our stakeholders, ease in using third party. So as we finish up, I want to end on another quote from this Forrester research. Invest in a CMDB to better understand the complexities of your IT environment. While CMDBs are challenging, and Mr. Betts says our data shows that they are coming into their own and essential to the high levels of digital performance. There's that word essential again, right? And so CMDBs being tied at an essential level to digital performance is big in my mind, that people are seeing that connection. And so I think we have to embrace it, say, how do we help people raise their game? And that is where I'm at, Jeff. Questions?
Jeff, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah. Hey, Jeffrey. So in the organizations that you're in, how closely integrated do you see configuration management with change management? Do you see that, well, first of all, that there is that integration and, there's inputs and outputs from each of those practices coming, out from change and into config and vice versa?
That's a great question. So I'm going to flash how big of a nerd I am for you all, okay? If you opened up the ITIL V3 book and you flipped over to configuration management, there's a chart of the process activities. And the third one is called configuration control, which is what you were talking about, right? But in most organizations, those are separate, they're siloed. And in fact, the one organization I'm helping right now, they're very siloed. And my job has been to build that bridge because, as I talked about, you only know what an unauthorized change is by the CMDB. It's helping each see the value of the other, if that makes sense. And so when we take that a step further, let me give you a real life use case, Ryan. Most companies only have their prod infrastructure and applications as scope for their change management. Is that fair? However, the CMDB relies on change to help keep the CMDB accurate. And so let me make this case. You all can disagree, and it's great. But I have this belief that all infrastructure, even for the dev test levels, is prod. Because as we move, think about somebody that's a developer. As they move it from dev to test to prod, we want to make sure that infrastructure is all the same. So we need to enforce change management through all three levels.
Yeah, and that makes sense too. Even if you think of your DevOps environments, I mean, that's
Yeah.
As we progress more and more, that's the case where things are in dev and released to production or released to live environments. That being said, do you see a lot of the DevOps, I'll use that term loosely here in air quotes, do you see them adopting configuration management and CMSs and CMDBs and such for that very reason, knowing that if they have the CI/CD pipelines where, let's just say, they hit the magic button and everything is deployed to production, yeah, you're going to need those CMDBs and everything and all your CIs to be known. Do you see that integration or at least improvement in that area?
Do, because it's driven by the change world, and it's driven by the automation on the change side. Let me give you a real life use case. If we have automated testing in Jira and we can integrate that with our service management tool, that when it passes the automation in Jira, it pops open a standard change because it's CI/CD or DevOps or whatever, right? It's in a pipeline. We're trying to get it through as fast as possible. And so it opens up a standard change. When it's done that, all automated, it goes to Jenkins or whatever the deployment software is to auto deploy, which brings up a really interesting conversation, Ryan, that it's my view that change management in the future, because of all this automation, will turn into more governance than approvals. Because a lot of organizations, CI/CD and DevOps, it's only through this automation that you're seeing their changes, because before they would say, nope, that's not a change. And so it's only through this automation. So the number of changes going up, that number is. However, you're not seeing as much need for hitting the approve button. And the other piece that's driving that is moving the change approval closer to the work. But yes, most of that's being automated. And if I could take that a step further, Ryan, sorry, I'm probably going way past where you
No,
were
no,
thinking,
keep,
what the
keep
question
going.
was.
We're
But
aligned.
I remember the good old days when we had a CD that had a server image, and we could deploy that server image a million times without issue. But when we updated that server image, that's where the scrutiny was. That's where the change, if we really thought about change requests, that's where the change request would need to be, right? Not on the deployment side, but on what went on that disk for that server image. Take that same over to CI/CD and DevOps. It's not the deployment that really needs scrutiny. That's why those can all be automated easily. It's the testing when something changed. How do we make sure that what we're deploying is really good code?
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Yeah, I know. Thanks for that detail. We are aligned. While I have you, Jeffrey, really quickly, in terms of if we do focus on the tools, just a question here: are you seeing any type of advancements with AI or any of the new technologies coming out to help, I guess, these environments understand what all their CIs are, or at least bring some intelligence into that process rather than firing up SolarWinds and saying scan the entire subnet? We know you could do that, but the problem is it's maintaining your CMDB afterwards, right? I mean, I can collect everything, but unless there's no tools before the rules, as we always say,
Right.
unless that's in place. So are you seeing, from that tool perspective, are you seeing any leaps forward in terms of how this is all organized?
Not enough,
Yeah.
especially since we see AI and ML driving everywhere else. And I actually had a recent LinkedIn post that our stakeholders are kind of getting irritated because they see us pushing those technologies in other places.
Yep.
Yet in the IT and or support, we're doing a bad job. Where I am seeing those is in the assessing of the risk for a change request. So there is movement afoot that says, I'm working on an automation project right now that says if it has this CI, this outage, yes, an outage, no, an outage, whatever, back out plan, how many groups involved, all those things that indicate complexity, then we can assess, give it a risk score. And if it's low risk, we can automate it all the way through. And
Yeah,
part of that is one of those is the attributes. When I talked about DR, some companies use gold, silver, metallic, all that junk, you could build a profile on what people choose and then automate accordingly. Because what's happened, and you all see this, or leaders are asked to do more with less. We are under some pretty high belt tightening in this world right now. There's resource limitations, and there's finite resources. We have to be able to do more, and automation in this is one of those ways. But I see it more on the change side than I do on the CMDB side. Most of your big tools, think the biggest one is they would just say you have to integrate it with SolarWinds, or you have to integrate with someone else. And where that tool really struggles is in storage, identifying and discovering storage, which sounds like no big deal until you have a storage go down and it's disruptive to your organization.
I thought you were going to say that, Jeffrey. Jeff and I, we've had some communications, just discussions in the past couple of months of, from an ITSM perspective, this industry needs a boost. It needs a leg up from all the new emergence of technologies, AI and all the, language learning models and all that needs to be incorporated, because these teams, they need assistance, and
oh yeah.
And yeah, it seems like we're moving forward, but not the same clip as some of the DevOps teams and so forth. So yeah, thank you for those answers, Jeffrey. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and just real quick, I'll tack on one more thought around that, which is, wouldn't it be nice, Jeffrey, if you mentioned the Pareto principle earlier in your presentation, wouldn't it be nice if we just knew what CIs or what different components had the most changes affecting them, or the most incidents affecting them? We didn't have to go manually search through our incident records or our change records to figure that out. That doesn't seem like a huge lift to ask from an AI perspective, but yet we struggled with just even getting current state figured out, much less keeping things accurate and up to date. So those kinds of things, I think, would just seem like low-hanging fruit. And that's part of what I think Brian's talking about too, is just the basic things we can move forward to introduce and implement this stuff.
I'll give you an even easier one. Every time somebody opens a major incident, the service that's impacted, that photo, that whatever, gets sent to the major incident team along with the list of recent changes automatically.
Yep.
That just seems like low-hanging fruit to me, right? Of easy automation. But to Ryan's point and to your point, I'm trying, if you could tell, I'm a pretty affable person. I try not to step into anything. But the tool companies make their money on spinning up new products, new modules, and they do less in investing in the existing ones. So I think that most of what Ryan and Jeff, you all are asking for will have to come through disruption of some kind, because they are not incentivized, at least enough, to push those boundaries on those types of things. Even knowledge, right? Like Jeff, to your point, knowledge should be the easy one to know what the last ones were, right? And then whatever that topic is, to have some automation to send it to those knowledge owners to update and make sure that whatever is the highest searched is readily available.
Yep, exactly. All right, I'm going to pause on questions here just for a minute. I'm going to reshare my screen, just go through my list of typical announcements. I don't have a meeting formally set up yet. We're going to skip August for our cadence and come back in September. And I'm looking at the third week in September after I'm back from a trip. So probably in the 20-something range for our next meeting, and in discussions with a speaker who's joined us before. And yeah, thanks for sharing your final screen here, Jeffrey. I want to give you a chance to do that too.
Right.
But I want to go ahead and just bring my announcements back up and then finish up with any other final questions that the group has. So again, exact date to be determined. Upcoming training classes and previous recording links. ITSM Academy does monthly webinars. I didn't update this one because I didn't see them update it, but I know they're doing those, and sometimes they take a break over the summer. And then the Agile community and the project management communities are listed here. So I just like to flash the screen and let people know of other opportunities to be part of the community. And a lot of these meetings are virtually, even if you're not from the Boise area. So wanted to get those out there. And again, as soon as I get a formal date picked for September and finish my discussions with our next speaker, I'll let you know about that. So Any questions about the meeting, please send those to me as well. And again, we'll try and work through the technical issues that are going on with Meetup. That's definitely disconcerting for me. I know we're expecting a larger group here this month, and hopefully they'll be able to come back and watch this recording once I get it posted out on my YouTube channel. So with that, I'm going to open it back up for the group. Judy, Dennis, Malik's here, but it looks like he's maybe having some audio issues. Any questions or comments for Jeffrey around his presentation or anything else CMDB or configuration management related?
I have a question around, and Jeffrey, great presentation. Thank you very much. But my question is around, talked about measuring completeness. Can you just help me with an example or maybe understanding of when you talk about how do we measure that all the CIs are in the CMDB? Because you did talk about the importance of that scope. It's not that we want to have every single CI at least start out with every single CI. So any tips around measuring the completeness of the CIs in our CMDB?
We can usually, through IP addresses, understand everything. Even if we don't want everything in there, we at least understand from A to Z what's available. Because our security folks, our security friends, they want us to have everything in there. They want to make sure that we have all of the compliance. Whoever does business continuity DR for the organizations want to make sure all that's in there. And so, Dennis, whenever I've had that problem in the past, I usually work backwards to the stakeholders, and it becomes much easier then. If you tell security, hey, we only have 80% in here, and we don't know what the other 20 is, they usually go help pave that road for us. But usually I do it through IP addresses. I worked for a company once, in an office building, you have those wireless adapters in every meeting room. They counted those as assets, but not CIs, which is their choice. They still knew what they were, but they didn't think that if one was down, that it was really an incident. And some people do stuff like that to manipulate the incident counts, but you all know how that goes. But usually, Dennis, to answer your question straightforwardly, it's through the IPs. And security usually knows that range. And so run discovery, understand what's out of our current scope, and then make that decision through governance. Do we want to add that or not?
Terrific. And kind of related to that, then another, I know when you said one of the big challenges often is getting the technical teams to own their data, which would help us in making sure we do have completeness in those CIs that the technical teams are responsible for. So any tips from your experience on how we can help those technical teams realize that they need to own it, the value of it, what's in it for them kind of thing?
I always go back to the with them. You said it. But so one thing not to do is to send them the mass batch of tasks before they know it's coming. Because it's in a big environment, discovery's going to run, and it's going to send them something for every one of them, which is overwhelming, and all it's going to do is go to the bottom. But the two things I've used is talk to those leaders, explain to them the value, and say, our ability to do incidents, our ability to do changes relies on this. And if that doesn't work, I usually publish metrics publicly. I promote visibly, and to make sure that, and not throw any, not put red through anyone or any of that, but nobody likes seeing themselves on the bottom. Nobody likes, no IT leader is going to like seeing his underlings or her underlings show up in 57% when everybody else is at 92. So I use a little bit of the reverse peer pressure.
Terrific. Thanks.
Yeah, and I
Does that
think
help?
some opportunity there too, Dennis, is what Jeffrey was saying about from the governance perspective through change. If your changes are coming in and they're fully tested and there's documentation, I think that's kind of the gate right there where you can effectively say, hey, these CIs are accurate or inaccurate or missing or they're complete, and yeah, change is approved. So that might be a logical kind of gate, if you will, in the organization, from a governance perspective, to help push those just updates or whatever's needed from that perspective.
Yeah. One other thing, Dennis, that I'll just quickly touch on is what's the system of truth in the organization? Because if the technical teams are still using their own spreadsheets or their own databases for their inventorying and updating and making changes and not the CMDB, and the only time they look at the CMDB is when you tell them to go audit it, that doesn't work either. So there has to be a combination of automation and change management, but to me, there also has to be, you own the data in the tool and not your own copy of the data that lives somewhere else. And you need to have a true system of record and agree on what that is from a governance perspective. And that goes a long way to getting them to have some skin in the game too. I think I've run into that situation numerous times.
Yeah,
Good
that's
point.
really a good point.
Yeah.
Really a good point.
And I will tell you how I bridged that, Jeff, is to try to get them an integration to their source system
Yep.
and say, okay, if we get this network team, everybody complains about the network team, so it's easy pickings for me to say. But if we integrate with Cisco Works or whatever it is, your networking tool, will you put your changes directly in it? Will you, do I have your word to make sure that this network data in my CMDB is accurate and things of that nature?
Yep. Very good. Judy,
Good
how about you? Any questions?
Yeah, great presentation, Jeff. So yeah, I really liked having the practical advice along with what Gartner is telling us and Forrester and the folks that have all of that knowledge. So I know in my previous organization, the question was always, how low do we go, right, in identifying our CIs? And we, at Procter & Gamble, we spent probably 3 or 4 different times trying to figure out what our CMDB CIs were, and tried to use auto discovery only to get an even bigger mess that we couldn't control and manage. So yeah, just trying to have those discussions of what makes the most sense. And I think especially with the advent of agile, and having various versions of applications running all at the same time, it really kind of completed that whole picture for the business users to identify what version are you using, because they were on some kind of rolling schedule, and we at the service desk, my team, didn't really know when those releases were going to be made available to what groups of users. So our solution was really to link all of that back in through change management.
That's a good point. And it also brings up the point of how the big tool makers really make it tough, because I don't know if you all know this, but most of them are not agent based, but the integrations are to agent based tools. And so it brings up a thing that's a little bit where the gap is as well.
Yeah, we actually built an API between Jira and ServiceNow. So, because, that's always the fact when I talk with developers, they're like, well, we keep ours in Jira. It's like, I know, but we need to keep it in ServiceNow, right? So, we basically eliminated that conflict by just, building an API between the tools.
And that begs the next problem after you solve that one is, where do you keep your knowledge? Where do you keep your defect logs? Where do you keep all that stuff? Because the service desk doesn't care that you kept your defect logs in Jira when something goes live and it bombs.
Right.
They don't want to go looking in Jira for whatever it is.
Yeah, we didn't even have access to it, right? So on a personal username account. So yeah. But yeah, great to kind of revisit that whole area of CMDB and understand how important it is. So thanks.
Thank you.
Hey, Jeffrey, one last question. Do you see a lot of organizations aligning their CIs to services? I think, not to mention some of the large vendors, but the common service data models and such, they're pushing for that, which is probably not a bad thing. But do you see that in the industry where the CIs do have that alignment to services? Or I should say those organizations that have their services identified and can speak to that?
Not many, because it's hard. I mean, it's really hard. And that specific tool maker that you mentioned would say you can flip on a switch and it'll auto map all of your services. And we know that every organization is going to take the same list of applications and they're going to chop them up a little bit differently, right? Yeah, and they're going to, what's an accounting service versus finance versus supply chain may look different depending on who the stakeholders are. And so that's also, Ryan, where that outside in approach is. But I will say, I'm going to take what you asked, I'm going to try to answer what you said and then carry it on. So most organizations do not have those conversations with their stakeholders because when they flip that switch, they end up with like 100 services. And you really should have like 20, 25, because there are certain things that are at such a low level that you really don't care about. And so that it's more art than science, but somebody's got to tell it into how to group. And so I don't see that often enough. And I've seen a lot of botched CMDBs and botched services mapped. You're talking about service mapping. The other thing about that tool is they layer in application portfolio management. And so it gets a little complex for a lot of organizations that don't have the right resources. But I still push towards let's understand the costs of these services and let our stakeholders tell us what they want to pay for, what's important to them, and work backwards.
No
Yeah.
tools before the rules, right? I keep
Yep.
saying it.
And I think another underlying part of that too is the implications. Is your organization doing a lot of internal software development, or are they mostly procuring applications off the shelf, or doing things from more of a vendor managed perspective too? Because then that changes the scope of your CMDB based on what that looks like. So there's lots of different implications there too, I think.
Yeah, and not many people do it well. Not many people do CMDB well, much less the advanced version of the services. And it's hard to convince a stakeholder that, let's say, email service or however communication that may include Teams or Zoom or whatever, that what they see is a small fraction of really what goes on behind, to support it. And so I really like the services view because I like being able to show them, hey, here's why it's costing you $4 a person a month, because we have this software cost, we have, and you go down. But Ryan and Jeff, the other piece to that is I don't see enough TCOs when we bring stuff on either. And so we don't have that transparency on the front side, and we're not measuring backwards to that.
Yeah, that's a great point. Well, I know Judy had to jump off. We're running a little bit past time because we got started a little bit late with the technical difficulties. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. If you want to hang out and visit for a little bit longer, we certainly can. But I do want to thank Jeffrey again for being here. It was a great presentation. I'm going to make sure that once I've stopped recording and we finish up, I'll get the video uploaded from the recording, and I'll share the links out to that. So if we want to continue to share this presentation, especially for folks that maybe were intending to be here and couldn't make it, we have the opportunity to do that. And again, next meeting will be third week in September, and trying to think of the date in my head, but it'll probably be around the 21st, 22nd, or whatever that timeline looks like. And more to come on that shortly. And with that, I'll end the recording. Thanks everyone for being here, and we'll see you next time.